there is an allergy to talking about mothering, in particular. And exactly why we've developed that allergy is a complicated one that I don't fully think I have the answer to.
Well, we sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I mean, I was just going to say, like, this conversation seems like it's been so pathologized throughout the years. Like, I remember hearing about the Satanic Panic as sort of like an outgrowth of anxiety towards an increase in daycare. And you also, it's not like we don't care about kids. We're concerned about them on TikTok or if there's any sort of trans stuff. But these sort of fundamental things about where we send them all day, we're not even talking about. Like, I mean, do you have any idea of how we get so off track on these issues?
Yeah. Look, if I'm about to tread into dangerous waters, okay? so buckle your seatbelts. No, I'm just kidding. But look, from what I can tell, okay, looking at the literature and also just looking at how people talk in normal everyday life, the issue with mothering and the reason things like the Satanic Panic are tied to things like daycares, we're talking about women working, which was at one point, right, kind of odd, kind of an oddity for the poor, who send their kids to the Hull House, who abuse their children, right? Then it became more of a middle class thing. And it's become more and more, not just normalized, expected. And the economy reflects that expectation. You cannot, first of all, you can't, if you're a millennial, like, you're out of luck buying a house, move to Texas, I guess. I don't know. 100%.
Don't do that. But all right.
Or whatever, like, you're just not going to own a house. But there are a lot of economic factors that make it absolutely necessary that both parents are working pretty much full time all the time, in order to maintain any decent quality of life in the United States. If you want to live in a city, it's even more expensive. And so you're talking about a pretty difficult thing, which is combines kind of gender and the history of feminism and how we think about progress with women in particular. And once you touch that, you really, I think a lot of people get nervous that they're flirting with the right wing. But here's the thing about the right wing is they have really educated, smart people talking on their side too. And they're also critical of daycare. That's actually how I got the original idea for the piece, is I was listening to a right-wing coded, I don't actually know if she's like fully right-wing podcast, and they were talking about daycare, and I was like, why doesn't the left talk like this? Why doesn't the left kind of question things like, when did we go from encouraging women to work so that they could like divorce abusive people to sending women back to work after 2 weeks after giving birth? Like, how did we get there? That's not humane. And there are material facts about being a woman, giving birth, and then being a baby that cannot be overlooked and dismissed as like outside of the realm of the leftist imagination.
I mean, I think that, you open up the piece, talking about something in Ireland, right? Where
a wild choice on my behalf.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sets it up in a way to, to really drive this point home where, basically there was a big push to change gendered language in the CARES Act there. And that's something that, like, for American leftists, having that not go through would be like seen as like a massive loss. Yeah. But you sort of note that, well, in Ireland, they're doing a lot more to protect those people who they're explicitly naming, and this kind of thing. It's like the American left, I think, is really terrible about talking about families. I think they're, not just mothers. Yeah. I mean, just families in general, because I think they've sort of taken the right wing bait that talking about these things are, belong to the right, belong to like the reactionary class. I mean, you'll see things like, not that we need to open this one up, but every once in a while on Twitter, you'll see some kid decide that, right now is the right time to start talking about abolishing the family.
Oh, God.
Which is, one of the worst things that you can be talking about if you're trying to build a mass movement in a country right now. We're like
full surrogacy now.
We're having, that's a whole other bit of problems. But like, at a time right now where like a lot of people feel tremendous anxiety because they feel alone, they feel like they don't have the access to be a part of a family. And instead of the left wing argument being like, look at all of these things that capitalism is doing to prevent you from experiencing that, right? Having security, having the ability to have a one income household, having the ability to stay with your child, all these kind of things are being attacked by capital and capitalism. And the left says, you know what if we also like jumped in on the capital side to sort of shut down these conversations about them because we're worried about the implication.
Yeah, I mean, that's, first of all, really well said. I think, like, again, we're talking about being in lockstep with capital. The left has this tendency, when the tendency, right, is, capitalism is destroying families. Capitalism is taking away mothers' abilities to spend time with their children. Capitalism is taking away people's like decent wages. Capitalism is the reason we have all these mass daycares that, underpay their employees and overpay the owners. Okay, this is a grotesque situation. And then the response is something like, I'm just not going to have children, right? Or, we should abolish the family or whatever. And these are, of course, personal choices, whatever. But if you think about it just for a little bit of a second, maybe this huge kind of fear of the family has more to do with an economic point. The facts on the ground, the facts that people don't want you to have time to have families. Families are increasingly becoming kind of the hobby horse of the wealthy. Maybe we should be exploring that rather than demonizing it as a right-wing talking point. And being, brave enough to talk about things like, I don't know, giving birth and being a woman and having children who are, children, right, are completely out of leftist talking points. And often, in my experience, when I'm talking to leftists about children, they're talking about like, well, the poor people. There's still this assumption that it's poor people with children, which is less and less the case. It's actually, we're talking about middle class people and children. And so the way that the left talks about children also tends to be like, well, let's just put them in daycare. I'm like, okay, that's very like, you turn of the century coded, right? It's like, oh, it's just the poor, they need work, we whatever, until we can get them higher, until we have full, what's it called, champagne communism now or whatever. I'm like, no, we were talking about like right now. We need like, for all the classes across, an immediate kind of push point that could bring a lot more people together and have us talk about real economic change, is talking about protecting things like maternity leave, something we don't have at all. Thinking about protecting, who wants to have a kid if you have to go back to work in 2 weeks? Why? Of course not. That's a completely normal response to a horrible option, or non-option. There's really no choice as to whether or not you're going to have a kid now. If you really know going into having a child that you're going to have to go back to work, let's even say 4 months later, that is a terrifying reality. And more likely than not, that's going to be an unpaid 4 months. It's going to be an unpaid 3 weeks. It's going to be an unpaid 6 months. Taking a year, you're going to lose your job. Okay. We have no protections for families, especially mothers, especially these young children. And so I just don't think hyper fixating on childcare as if child rearing is not something that everyone should have the opportunity to do is a worthwhile focus.
Yeah, my brother recently had a second child, and he's in North Dakota, so it's a little bit easier to buy a house there. And he actually works for a place with a generous, I think it's like month, and maybe it was even 2 months. For the first one, I think he might have just took extra time off. But the way he talks about that time, it seems like the most maybe graspable utopia. Like you're not under a capitalist. I mean, is job paid for it? But that's why it should be not through the job, but maybe a government program, so people aren't thanking their bosses for this. But like that, you have this space of time where you're not under a boss and your priority is your family. Like that seems just such an obvious thing to emphasize as this is a kind of future or a glimpse at a future that we want.
First of all, herein lies, to me, the real dark spot is fucking being so stoked. I'm sorry I keep cussing. I hope that's okay. I think it's I've heard this before. Okay. Is the 8 weeks, right? Oh, I got 8 weeks paid. I didn't have to think about my boss. I got this completely protected time. 8 weeks, 2 months. We need to really like, if that's good for your boss, that means it's not good for you. Okay. Let's start there. If, they can afford 4 months, that means that that's what they're allowing, to kind of keep you around, right? We need to be demanding a lot more, especially if we want to take seriously the health of children and mothers in particular. I'm talking year. Let's push for 2 years, okay? And then we'll negotiate down to a year. So that's where I would start with that. That really, that's a very common story, right? I'm just so lucky I got 8 weeks paid. I'm so lucky I got 6 weeks paid. I'm so lucky I got 2 weeks unpaid. I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ. This is not normal. This is like not a normal, headspace to be in. The left needs to get out of there, first of all. And then, of course, it should certainly not be dependent on one's job. So the United States, from I think it's the early 90s or something like that, passed a law, first time for everything, protecting, parental leaves, really maternal leaves. I mean, it's like 12 weeks unpaid. 59% of women do not qualify for that 12 weeks of unpaid leave that the federal government, has so graciously set aside for us, for a variety of reasons. I mean, the quality, what is it? What's the phrase? The something to entry? The barrier to entry. Thank you. Is so high. So high. You have to have had that job for a certain amount of time. You have to be a full-time worker rather than a part-time worker. You basically can't have any complications with your birth. I mean, there's a whole set of institutional boundaries to getting that 12 weeks unpaid for the federal government. So
then, I mean, imagine a lot of people in certain kinds of work bringing that up to their boss, and having them be receptive to it, regardless if it's legal or illegal. And then also, the kind of pressure, the fundamental pressure that, women experience too, is that like, oh, well, if you're going to be out of work for so long, why should I have you in this, position, right? Which is,
yeah. I mean, there are no job protections, even if you do take, say, like a more robust leave. Say you got 4 months, say they guarantee you those 4 months. It does not guarantee you keep your job for those 4 months. And one thing that I always go back to when I'm talking about daycare, where I talk about maternity leave in particular, is the woman who, checks you out at Rite Aid or at the 7-Eleven or works the front desk or whatever. Those women got 2 weeks unpaid. Who is watching their child 2 weeks later? How are they feeling? Did they get, how often after giving birth you get sick? You're so fucking tired. If you had a C-section, you can barely walk. 2 weeks later, you're basically still pregnant. You certainly look pregnant for months, by the way, after. It's fucking, it's not an easy thing that you just go and like hop out a baby, especially today when a lot more women are having babies later on in life. And I cannot stop thinking about those women who then not only are making minimum wage, but then are paying almost their entire paycheck to these really low quality daycares. So I've talked about how bad high quality daycares are. You can't wrap your head around these low quality daycares. They're dangerous. Oftentimes they they don't have anyone looking in to make sure that they have even like fire codes, stuff like this. You hear horror stories about especially in-home childcare, which has benefits, I think, to the parent, because you go and it's the same, grandma and grandpa, watching your kids all day. But there are health concerns. There are, it's kind of hard to get into because I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty, but that's where a majority of American children are being raised in their first year of life, rather than next to their mother, next to their parent, next to their grandmother. They're getting raised in an institution where, under an underpaid worker and in a often dangerous environment.
Yeah. And I mean, no, and I think, I really appreciate the piece, and I appreciate you coming out and talking about it, because, these are kind of conversations that I think on our side, on the left wing side in this country, we've gotten really, really bad at doing, particularly anything that is like straight up for something, right? Because we're talking about something more than just like giving tax credit on, on daycare. We're talking about, hey, we want to claw back people's, sovereignty and free time and, meaningful stuff. And we're also doing something that I think people on the left are really bad about talking to. It's like gendered work in this country. I mean, from this to some of the other things, pathologies we're talking about, to, the degrowth weirdos, the anti-worker guys, are always going on and on and on and on and on and on about how they want to, destroy every washing machine and dishwasher in the United States, because maybe we could all go and, go to the river like back in the old days and spend a couple hours washing our clothes, and it's like, there's a real disconnect from.
I'm glad I don't know who you're talking about. That's immense. That's crazy.
Oh, dude.
I don't know.
You gotta, well, what,
Your side of Twitter is dark.
Yeah, it is pretty bad. But I mean, this is what is passing right now for like left-wing thought in the U.S. And I think that that's a real shame, frankly.
Yeah, before we let you go, Courtney, is there any place that's doing this well? Like, where's the best place for maternity leave, or alternative to that, if we're, it's all one world under capitalist control, what should be, besides like 2 years, what are some things people should be looking at?
Oof, that's a great question. And it's a hard one to answer, and I'll try and be as brief as humanly possible. First of all, if you can avoid daycare, I would suggest it. I don't think that's possible for most people, but if you can, that's important. It's there's a reason though that a lot of work, bosses like Meta and Amazon are now enforcing return to office policies, and a lot of it has to do with, it was good for moms. Imagine how great that is for a mom. I work from home, and I'm so lucky that I can hire a babysitter part-time. And she and I can kind of tag team raising this kid together. That means Leo sees one person every day, or, one out of family person every day, and grows used to her, and has people he knows he can rely on. We didn't really get to talk about the nitty gritty of the horrors of daycare and why they're problematic. But one of them is like, children deserve adults that are stable in their life. So anytime you can have and provide for your child a stable parental figure, that's the best anyone can do. Mm-hmm. And there are reasons that the mom might be an ideal parental figure, but there is a long history of there being multiple parental figures who, it's called allo parenting in the literature, and that's that would be if I was going to propose an ideal kind of vision for America. I'm always nervous to do this, but I would look back to the 1940s, where there was a brief moment where the left imagined cooperative housing, and those cooperative housing units, the very few that were built, often included cooperative daycares run by mothers and their neighbors. And look, that sounds so like, let's all move to the commune with our besties. But I mean like your actual neighbors. I mean the strangers next door. Mm-hmm. I mean, kind of building a universe where children are cared for by everyone in a community. I don't mean trad wife, right? I don't mean like mothers should be stay-at-home moms. If mothers are staying at home, they cannot be alone. That is an impossible and really difficult task. We need to think about, how we build up communities, while also thinking very seriously about how we protect those mothers' future prospects of work. So not only should we have robust maternity leaves, we need communities that support those maternity leaves. And then we need return to work policies that are flexible, that recognize that you're still a mother even a year, 2 years later, and need a job that recognizes and celebrates that fact. Mm. And there are moments in history where we briefly, toyed around with that concept. And I think the left has a lot to learn by returning to that kind of early history.
Well, I think your piece definitely gets us started in that conversation. People should pick it up in the newest issue of Damage. The left should leave daycare advocacy to the libs. You can get it at damagemagazine.com. Really great pieces also in here. I mean, Dustin Guisella has a great piece. Jen Pan, who you all know from the Jacobin show and guest on Left Reckoning. Amber Lee Frost has a really great piece on trad wives.
She's the best writer. It's so annoying.
It's a lot of fun. It's a really beautiful publication, so people should pick it up. Courtney, is there anything else? Tell people where they can follow you for sure. You're a great follow on Twitter.
Oh, fuck. What's my...
Oh, I know it, isn't it?
CK Rawlings, CKAYE Rawlings, RAWLINGS. Please follow me just for fun, just so I have more friends. And yeah, hopefully I'll be writing more soon, so keep an eye out.
Well, we're looking forward to that. There'll be links below to all of that, friends. And thank you very much again, Courtney.
Thanks.